Well, maybe your financial ship finally came in, and when it did, you were at the airport cutting a deal on this. Or this. Or maybe even something like this. Well, tap the brakes because your insurance company may have other plans for you. And the truth is we've been reporting in Aviation Consumer and over its sister publication, Kit Appliance Magazine, the aviation insurance market has taken a hardened turn. It's left a lot of airplane owners with either non-renewal of their policies or rates that are a lot higher than they've ever seen. To try to get a handle on what's going on here, we rounded up a few of the aviation insurance industry's most respected and experienced professionals for an insurance roundtable discussion. Now, I was supposed to do this at AirVenture this past summer at one of the forum areas, but obviously that didn't work, so we're doing it via Zoom. We've got Marcy Veroni at Avemco. We've got Scott Smith from Sky Smith Specialty Insurance. We've got John Doolittle from Sutton James Optisure in Hartford, Connecticut. Here's a candid discussion. Scott, we'll start with you. Click on your website and in bright red, bold text, it basically echoes what we've been hearing at the magazine, and that's that things are changing in the aircraft insurance market, from rates to insurability of older pilots. Why don't you kick it off and tell us what you're seeing from your perch?
Well, and that's why we put the disclaimer, I guess, on the website, is that things have changed. And this started way before COVID, so it wasn't even COVID. It was the increase in rates and the increase in requirements by underwriting and the changes in their underwriting guidelines through whatever data they use or whatever reasons. And there's been all kinds of stories. We've heard things, you know, as a broker, we've heard all the different reasons that the increases happen and all the changes happen. We've seen it. The rates have went up. I tell people 30 to 300%. It's not typically that big, but at the same time, we've had some big rate increases for some of our customers. And they've had unique circumstances that caused it, but that's not the only, and they're not the only ones. I mean, I had a Cardinal that had a gear up, that had an open claim, and the current insurer decided they didn't really want it, but no one else would take it, and they increased him from $1,200 to $5,000. So huge increase. He had a bank. He has no options. He's stuck with that to pay it because he couldn't pay the airplane off. It felt bad for him, and it's a huge increase, but that's not the normal. And then we've had the problems with pilots that are old, and it's, I've been at the aviation insurance since '85, and started when I was in my 30s and going to the air shows and going building my book of business. I've got a lot of customers I've had from the beginning. Those guys are in their 70s, some of them in their 80s. And those people are running into some problems, and they're saying, what are we going to do? Why can't I get more quotes? How come I only got one renewal quote? Why didn't I get somebody else? And we tell them, well, we quote everybody but Avemco. Thanks, Marcy. And we send them to Avemco and say, try them if you can get something from there. And actually, recently we did that. We just sent somebody, and he got it from Avemco because I couldn't get him anything better than what he wanted with our market. And it makes it difficult, but that's kind of what we've seen. We do a lot of experimental aircraft, which is probably more of my market. I probably half my business experimental airplanes. Did a lot of vans, a lot of glass airs, a lot of unique things. I did all the comp airs. So I've had a level one-of-a-kind experience to try to go get it. Well, this changed, because what we used to be able to do and get an underwriter to sit down and underwrite a unique one-of-a-kind airplane has gotten very difficult. Most of the underwriters and the companies that did that for me have now all went computerized, and if it doesn't fit the system, they don't want to quote it. So it's changed how we market everything. And I do seminars around the country on buying airplanes and owning airplanes. And one of the things I do is I throw out aviation insurance. Say, if you're going to buy an airplane, think about the insurance, because if you have to buy insurance, you got to be careful what you buy. And that's been kind of why we put that big logo up there and said, hey, be careful. Things are changing. Don't be surprised. We're going to try to do everything we can, but it's going to be a unique experience. It's a tough one to follow up.
Yeah. John Doolittle, how about you? You've been at this a long time there at Sutton James in Hartford. What do you see?
I see the same things I think that Scott does. One of the biggest problems with having been in the business for 30 years and having had loyal customers for 30 years is that all of a sudden they're 80 years old. And
yeah,
all of a sudden the market has taken one of its cycles, and it's really hard to get stuff done. Really hard to get I think we're going to be down, when we're down to 300, when we're down to no pilots at all, because they're all getting so old, we'll still have 300,000 airplanes registered, I think. But yeah, I would say the market swing is catching the old pilot thing. And between the two of them, it's making it very hard to get people, especially people who want higher limits of liability. Very tough to get them renewal. And we generally, with our guys, we start talking to them when they're 58, 60 about a long-term home. The insurance companies are looking for long-term customers. And they don't want somebody who changes companies every year for a few bucks. They want the guy that's going to stick with them. And, sooner or later, they're going to come to a point where either they quit flying on their own or an insurance company is going to make them. So in order to stretch that as far as we can, we generally sit down with them each year and say, look, here's the company that we recommend. It's a little bit more now, but if you're going to stay in that airplane for 5 more years, we think this is the best shot at getting insurance for you every year.
Marcy, how about you from your first year at Avemco?
I have to say that I too am hearing what John and Scott are talking about, but here at Avemco, it's business as usual. We haven't changed our guidelines, we haven't changed our underwriting philosophy, and we haven't changed our prices. So we are able to hold on to our book, and we are taking on some new clients because we're getting a lot of calls saying, hey, my agent said to give you a call. But with that said, I also have to protect the folks that have been loyal to us and have been with us for 30 and 40 years. I too started in 86, and I have customers that, we've grown old together, and they're the backbone of our company, and they're the reason why we're still here. And so we haven't really participated because we are direct. We haven't played the pricing game at all. The price is the price, the guidelines are the guidelines, and that's why we've been doing this for 60 years.
Why are older pilots seemingly being targeted, higher rates, and all the issues that we're talking about? And it's easy to say, well, I'm going to dive into the NTSB reports and try to see if older pilots are bending airplanes more now than they have ever, because the types of accidents that any pilot, particularly an older one, might be involved with may not make the NTSB reports. We're talking gear up landings, maybe loss of control where the airplane goes off the runway and into the weeds, it gets banged up. Those types of crashes may not end up in the NTSB reports. So I guess the long and the short of it is you may not get a true picture of what's going on with older pilots by looking at NTSB reports. So the question for each of you is, why do you think older pilots are being sort of singled out here? And Marcy, you sort of touched upon it with the fact that you're trying to protect your existing clients. Scott, what do you think?
I don't know that there is any kind of study out there that shows it. I've talked to underwriters, and they've given me feedback that said, oh, well, we've had a lot of losses with ground loops in old tailwheel airplanes with older pilots. They haven't specified that they've got a study that says that. That's the underwriter saying, the specific one. He says, well, we've done a lot of payoffs because they aren't flying, every 2-3 months they go out and take the airplane out. They're a little slower on their skills. I don't think there's real proof. There may be actuarial data that we don't have access as a broker. I don't have access to that and don't really want it. But so there may be some sort of actuarial data there saying it. But there's also, we had a Mooney with the company who, when the guy, a little Mooney M20, when the guy turns 70 this year, they require him to have a co-pilot in the airplane. And I called the underwriter and said, when did this happen? And he said, well, just this year we started that we feel that since they're 70, they need a co-pilot in the airplane qualified. And I said, that was crazy. We had another quote for them, which was substantially higher. Of course, they were very cheap. And that apparently was why they wanted, maybe cheap's the wrong word, they were very low priced. And that's probably why they were requiring the second pilot. where the other companies weren't, and they were higher priced. And it's a very difficult thing. This pilot thing is, there's been cycles in aviation insurance and aviation throughout the years. I mean, we had high interest rates for a while, then you have high fuel rates, you have all these things that cycle up and down, but we never had the pilot problem, I don't think, because most of our young pilots were coming in from building their hours and going to the airlines. And now we've lost a lot of pilots. And of course, now during COVID, we don't have the airlines flying as much as they used to. There was a huge demand for pilots before COVID started. So I think there was a potential to get some new life into the system. But through those cycles, we still had pilots in their 50s and 60s all the time. Now we're seeing pilots in their 70s and 80s, and that's a lot of our pilots. And we're not getting the new blood in like we used to. And it kind of scares me from the marketing side is, well, what are the underwriters, I want to say, what are the underwriters thinking? We got COVID when nobody's flying. We've got all these pilots that aren't coming into the industry, the young pilots. And now you're hitting on the older pilots. What are you doing? Why are you picking on them? And there's still a lot of pilots that probably, I'm early 60, and there's people that are probably better shape than I am in their 70s and late 70s, and way better pilots than I am. So how do they rationalize that? I don't know. But it's a problem I think we're going to run into over the next year or two.
Yeah. John, you've got a loyal client base, folks that you've been brokering for a lot of years, and you've seen your clients upgrade airplanes. What are you seeing as they get older and maybe upgrade airplanes to higher performance, maybe some turbines? What are you seeing from your older clients?
Well, to go back just to the old pilot thing for just a second, if you think about it from the underwriter's point of view, and Marcy won't have any trouble with this, of course. There are 70-year-old guys who can fly as well as they could when they're in their 20s. And there are other 70-year-old guys who shouldn't be allowed to drive automobiles. The problem is if you're an underwriter sitting in an office building in Atlanta or New York or Houston or wherever, you don't know which is which. You don't know if you have the guy that plays tennis 3 times a week or the guy that just had a stroke. But both of them are in Cessna 210s. Which would you underwrite? And that's what they're faced with. In the face of that, they all sort of take the position, well, we should keep away from that kind of business because it has a lot of loss potential.
Marcy, at Avemco, are you seeing an older pilot breaking airplanes more now than before, or what are you seeing from aging pilots as far as claims?
I'm going to kind of piggyback on Scott. I am the underwriter. I do have the data, and next year we'll be in business 60 years. I have 60 years of data that tells me a senior pilot 60 years ago is doing the same thing that a senior pilot's doing today. And so, insurance is the law of large numbers. How many of them are out there for us to spread the risk around? And anybody younger than 20, older than 70, whether you're flying an airplane or driving a car, you're going to see an increase in the rate. I'm not seeing 70-year-old people, have ground loops more than 20-year-old people. I'm seeing people that are flying tail draggers have ground loops. And then you add or delete based on what you're seeing as a whole. So we're lucky there. So the answer is no. I'm not any more than I've seen for the last 33 years I've been with the Avemco.
Well, let's take that one step further. Are you more or less tolerant of those ground loops? So if I'm 50-something years old, if I finally buy my 185 tail dragger and I go out and I ground loop this thing a few times and I've bent it a few times, are you more or less tolerant of that type of wreck?
If you have an accident, I'm not going to non-renew you, if that's your question, unless you were, doing something crazy while it happened. If you meet the terms of our policy and you meet the contract terms and you have a claim, I'm going to pay the claim. I may take away your claim-free discount, which if you've been with us for a few years could be as much as 15% of your premium. So that's the answer.
Can I ask you, Marcy? Do you think that it has an effect that maybe there's fewer airplanes flying that are insured that might be changing the number. I mean, we're seeing these numbers and people say, the idea is, well, the rates are up on older pilots. Maybe there's more accidents for older pilots. Maybe it's just the fact that those are the people that are flying. And that's our basis of all of our numbers is more 70-year-old pilots than there is 50-year-old pilots. So it skews the numbers a little bit. It's not that there's more claims. It's just that's where the numbers are. Does that make sense?
I heard you say that we're not getting a lot of folks into aviation, but I can tell you that during COVID, our phones were ringing off the hook with folks that were learning to fly or maybe unable to fly for the airlines, so now they were renting airplanes, and we sell a renter policy, and those numbers just really jumped since March. I'm seeing a lot of younger folks coming into the industry. In my other life, I'm immediate past chair for women in aviation, and I'm really happy to say that female pilots have increased 1%, first time in over 30 years. So I'm seeing a lot of women, I'm seeing a lot of minorities, and I'm seeing more people come into the industry. So I don't agree with that.
Well, and I'm not sure, from my standpoint, we do some non-owned or renters insurance, but we don't do a lot of that. Mine is based on mostly what people are buying, and so we're not seeing the young people buying the airplanes like they were. I can understand people going into aviation, and I've seen that, but I don't see the numbers of people buying airplanes that we used to as new owners because of the younger side. And a lot of that is my son's 30-some years old, and he probably doesn't have the money to go out and buy an airplane or the interest, and I've talked to other people that are saying, well, I'd rather put my money in something else. So there are the diehards that want to get into aviation. But from our side of it, what I'm seeing, you get a lot of people building their first when we're talking kit planes, we get a lot of people building their first airplane when they're 70 years old. They've got time to build. They go out and they buy some little home built that's fairly inexpensive. They're building it in their garage. And now they want to go fly, and they've got 100 hours, and they've had their license for 25 years. We're seeing a lot of that, and you're laughing about that, but we do. We're seeing a guy with 100 to 125 hours who says, hey, I built my first Zenith or my Sonics or my Glass Star or whatever it might be, or vans, and now they want to get insurance, and they're shocked by the rates, and when we tell them, don't build a tail wheel because you're going to get high rates, build a tri-gear, do this, do that, stay away from this, and they say, well, that's my dream airplane. I've been waiting all my life to do it. We're seeing a lot of that kind of stuff. Is that it's not that, and so I agree. I don't know that young people aren't getting into it. I don't see the young people for our business buying into it like we did. Buying the airplanes we have. We do have young people buying. I just said, you get young people that buy a Cirrus or they buy something else or a little 172 to build time in. But it's not like it used to be. But on the other side is we see a lot of old pilots that are coming out of the woodwork. I think the sport or the basic med brought people out of the woodwork where they said, now I can get my license again. I haven't flown for 5 or 7 years. I'm going to go take my medical and I'm going to go buy that 172, or typically as I'm going to go buy that Baron that I want to get into, and then they jump into the airplane. And that's kind of what we've seen it's that kind of market. That's and that's a little bit more probably on the kit plane market. We're still seeing people buy 172s and all that kind of stuff. But when you're dealing with the kit plane market, there's a lot of guys that are coming in out of the older age with the time and the money to build what they want to build, and now they're ready to fly and they haven't flown for years.
Is that a problem, and is that getting the attention of the insurance market? The fact that we're flying less and our skills may not be what they used to be.
Oh, definitely. We're seeing some of that. And I've read, that people aren't flying, but our experience has been different. Our phones have increased with especially folks building kit planes. And again, it's all ages, I'm not seeing a huge segment of an older senior pilot group. I'm seeing people in their 30s and 40s building airplanes. Again, I think it's because of COVID and they're sitting at home and they need something to do. So we sell a kit plane builder policy, and we've sold a lot of those this year.
A pretty lively market in the experimental and home build sector. If somebody is interested in building an experimental or buying an existing experimental, they may not have thought about insurance. We all wander around these air shows and we looking at some of these hot experimental airplanes. Well, insuring it may be a different story. So if you had advice for somebody looking to get into that market, maybe they want to get rid of that Cessna 421 or P210, and finally, they're getting a little bit older, and I want to finally build my own airplane or buy one that somebody's already built. What advice might you have for somebody stepping into that market for the first time?